Hi everyone, I'm Martin, welcome to Track Talk. Now it's exactly 1 week since Warley, and that was a very interesting and enjoyable show. There's lots of videos on YouTube all about Warley, all the layouts and everything, all the announcements and everything, so I'm not going to go over any of that. I'm going to make two quick points though actually about my personal reflections on the event, and then we're going to get stuck into answering some of your questions and kind of reflecting on some of the comments you've been making about the recent videos. So there were two things I'd like to reflect on from Warley very quickly. The first is that for me, the experience was all about connection with people. I spent most of the day walking around, chatting to people. I probably missed quite a few of the layouts. I had a little bit of a nose around some of the vendors, but for me the real value in going along was talking to everyone. So talking to some of you guys who watch the channel, which was great. Especially hearing your thoughts on what you do and don't like in YouTube videos, that's kind of really useful and that kind of helps me going forwards. But also being able to talk to lots of other people. So being able to talk to the Kendall Model Railway Club about how they make trees. That was incredibly useful because that's really an undiscovered country as far as I'm concerned. I've never made a tree in my life, so that's going to be very useful for when we get to that point on the layout. But then just talking to other people, being able to chat with Mike Wilde of Warley magazine about just making the switch from 00 gauge to TT. That's just a fascinating conversation to have. Chatting to Richard from New Junction again, that was a lot of fun. Even saying hi to Sam and Chloe from Sam's Trains. All of these things kind of really make an interesting and enriching day. At the end of the day, as modelers, we spend a lot of our time on our own. Right now, I'm sat in a garage on my own talking at a camera, so being able to get some feedback from people and kind of talk about things was incredibly useful, and I think that's what made the day rewarding for me anyway. So my first point was really about me with my modeller's hat on, going and experiencing Warley. My second is kind of going there with my business hat on. Now I'm still new back into this hobby, and so the kind of marketplace of kind of vendors and traders and things like that is still very new to me. Now, and in my day job, one of the things I do is I work with businesses to develop emerging leaders and to understand about their own management and leadership techniques and how those directly result in kind of commercial success. So for me, it's fascinating what you can pick up just walking around an exhibition and seeing some of the interactions between some of the people who work for some of the big brands within our hobby. Now, I'm not going to talk about any specific companies, as I don't think that's fair. But I did notice some very interesting correlations in that I saw lots of what I would call as very old-fashioned management techniques and styles being used across some of the vendors. And I did notice a correlation between those and maybe some of the more established brands within the marketplace. Whereas the newer brands, the ones I would kind of call challenger brands within the hobby, there was a very different feel to the way that people within those organisations were talking to each other and the way that they were interacting with people. I think that was incredibly fascinating to observe. What does that mean? Well, I would like to hope that means good things for the hobby. I'm slightly fearful for some of the brands where some of those old-fashioned, where I can see some of those quite old-fashioned techniques being used. Now, as modelers, I think we want a vibrant industry and a vibrant marketplace. Lots of vendors means lots of competition, lots of innovation, keeps prices down, and can only be a good thing for a modeler. If we lose particularly a big brand from this hobby, then it's going to be really interesting what that impact might be. So I'm hoping that some of the things I saw don't manifest in a bad way, but for me that was very fascinating to kind of go in there into kind of a fresh industry, one that I'm kind of new to, and to observe some of that just from an exhibition. But let's put Warley behind us for now and come on to some of your questions and comments. And I've been going back through the videos that I posted on the channel so far, pulling out some of the questions that you've been asked. I'm going to answer some of those today, and I've got a whole series of them lined up for the next Track Talk as well. So if I don't talk about your question today, then please do stick around because I will be talking about that in the future. So Tim asked a question about the retaining walls that are right here behind me. When I did the video talking about those, one thing I didn't do was provide any explicit measurements of those, which in kind of hindsight is a little bit of an oversight. So what I'll do is I'll get the rule out and I'll get some measurements of those just to help you understand some of the decision making around why I made them the size I did and how that kind of fits into the overall layout. So let's get over to the layout and have a look. So Tim asked about the measurements for the retaining walls, I believe because he's looking at putting some in on his layout. I wanted to kind of get a sense for the kind of the scale and the measurements here. And it's one thing I didn't mention when I made them. Now, the main consideration here for me is getting the correct separation between the top running lines here and this heritage line so there's enough clearance through the tunnel. So that's kind of what drove, that's kind of really the main point that kind of drives that separation. So if I stick a rule here between the top of the rail and the very bottom of that tunnel portal is pretty much 7 centimetres, so 70 millimetres. And that kind of really then drives everything else. So as I said, this tunnel portal came off Thingiverse. So it naturally has a height to the top of that capping stone there of, that's about 9 centimetres. I don't know if you can pick that up on camera. So that then feels like roughly the right kind of level to continue that wall round. When we look at the height between the top of the baseboard and the top of the baseboard on the running line here, that's 70 millimetres. Round here, that's going to be slightly higher. As you can see, that's kind of closer to maybe 85 millimetres. And that means that these retaining walls are getting smaller as we come along this way. They are, just for reference, 100 millimetres across. And there is also a height from the baseboards of the upper line to the top of them. But what we'll do is we'll flip round to the other side so you can see that a bit clearer. Now I've popped coach in here just so you can see the proportions here between the coach and the retaining wall, and I think that looks okay. That's not kind of a huge wall that looks kind of unrealistic from an engineering perspective. Obviously that coach will run through that tunnel perfectly. So here we are on the other side. So this is the view from the main running lines. Let me try and hold the camera steady while I drop a ruler in there. And you can see that that is about 20 centimetres high there. Obviously that's without any cork down. So if I were to just kind of pop a bit of cork in there, you'll see that's kind of what the height's going to actually be. So yeah, that's now just under 20 centimetres there. So scale-wise, that's kind of about 4 foot, between kind of 4 and 5 foot, which feels like about the right kind of height wall to go around there from this side of the tracks. So I hope that provides some useful information, Tim. If there are any other measurements that you'd like that I haven't particularly talked about, then please do leave another comment and I'll get those back to you. So one observation from you from the layout update video was about catch points on the exit from the engine shed. I think it was Henry Best who left this comment, saying shouldn't there be a catch point on the exit from the engine shed onto the running line. So let's get over to the layout and have a look at that. So we have our engine shed up here with our 2 lanes and the exit down here. And what was mentioned is that shouldn't there be a catch point around about here to protect this main running line? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, and that's a great spot. Now, I laid the heritage line track a few months ago now, and when I did that, I don't know if I've mentioned before that this is Pico bullhead track. There were no kind of off-the-shelf catch points available at that time. So what I did was made the decision just to kind of put track in there. I know Pico do have a very good video on making your own kind of catch point out of rail. At the time I did this, I didn't feel confident in doing that. And I had completely forgotten that I hadn't done that. So it was a great spot from Henry. I hope that's your name, Henry. So thank you very much for highlighting that. What that does mean is I can come back and revisit this at a later point, but it also means that when I think about putting a ground signal in, I won't put it as close up here. I'll leave space up here for that catch point, so that's very useful. And this makes a very good point. in that I'm building this model pretty much on my own. So when you guys spot things that I haven't thought about or I've maybe missed, that's incredibly valuable to me. So please do keep making those observations. It really feels like you've kind of got my back on this when I'm building this. It gives me a lot of confidence in terms of what I'm doing. So thank you for that, and please do keep those comments and suggestions coming. Now, the final topic I want to talk about today is laser cutting, as this is the topic that's probably generated the most comments and questions on the channel so far. Now, the laser cutter I use is a Creality Falcon 2. It's a 22 watt laser cutter. Some of the reasons for buying that are that there are lots of good reviews about it. Creality is a brand I've always used with 3D printers, and therefore certainly one that I trust to provide great value in the things that they produce. But it's also worth noting that the laser printer is owned by my company. Now, that provides a very good opportunity for me in that my company uses the laser cutter to produce immersive learning activities and games and puzzles and those kind of things. But to be able to do that, we need people who are skilled up on 3D design and on how to get the best out of the laser cutter. So from a training perspective, there are kind of two real options here. I myself and other people in the business could go off on training courses. Obviously, there is a cost then to the business of doing that. Or what we can do is we can learn ourselves. We can use things like our hobbies as a way of developing our own skills. We can buy our own materials. We can do our own kind of design and experimentation in our own time if needed, and then use the company's laser cutter to bring some of those to life. And that works as to the advantage of both parties. That I as an individual get to learn how to use that technology. The company gets my increased expertise in terms of how I'm able to use that and able to produce kind of even better and cooler things for our clients. So from my perspective, that's a win-win. But I realise that that's not an option for everyone. Laser cutters are also still quite expensive, relatively speaking, compared to a 3D printer. That they are much more expensive. But there are ways of getting access to laser cutting technology, and I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about some of those, as they may not be things that you've necessarily thought about. So there are various online services where you can create your 3D models, send those over to a company and they will cut those for you, charge you some money and send them in the post. Now that is great if you have proven designs, but that's really not a great way of doing kind of prototyping and experimentation. So if you are in that situation, there are some other things that you might want to consider. The first is one that you might not have thought about, and that's that there are a lot of schools, particularly secondary schools, who are bringing laser cutting into their design and technology classes. And some of those schools, and it's mostly academies, are starting to think about themselves and how they fit within their communities and are actually opening up as community learning hubs. So we're very used to schools opening up their leisure facilities, like their sports pitches and things like that, to people to hire after hours. But increasingly, other facilities within the school are also being opened up in this way. And so there are some schools that will allow access into the design and technology lab after school for a fee. And that may be one way in your area that you can get access to some of this technology. Now, similarly, and maybe a little bit more common at the moment, particularly in the UK, and I'm sure it's the case in other countries as well, is we have these great organisations called makerspaces. Now, a makerspace, if you're not familiar, is usually a workshop or another lab environment, and a club of people, each paying an amount of money each month towards that club to get access to that facility. So all the equipment within there is shared, but increasingly these makerspaces are purchasing laser cutters, but also lots of other tools that are not necessarily economic to buy and use at home. So have a look around for a makerspace in your area. It may well be that you can find one with laser cutting facilities, and then with a little bit of 3D design training, you may be able to then get access to the technology for a much more affordable price than going out and buying one for yourself. So those are just a couple of ideas. It'll be very dependent on where you are and what kind of facilities you have around you. But the message from me is always think creatively about these things, and where you can take advantage of these advances in technology, but we don't necessarily need to pay huge amounts of money to do that. So I hope some of that helps. I hope that answers some of the questions that some of you have about laser cutting. As you will see, it's going to be a reoccurring theme on this channel, and I'll do my best to kind of take you through the steps of how you kind of get into that technology and how to use it for modelling as much as I can. And again, please do ask questions on that subject or anything else if you do have them. Okay, that's it for another Track Talk. Thank you to everyone who submitted comments and questions so far. As I say, I've got lots more to talk about, so I will certainly get round to some more of those in the next episode. Right, have a good one, everyone. I shall see you soon. Bye, mate.